Hi everyone. In this video, we will be dealing with a post-colonial work, that is Orientalism. So Orientalism was published in 1978 and it is written by Edward Said. So this work is important from a net point of view, and this is also a very important post-colonial work where you will get an idea about the prejudices or the bias of portraying the Eastern people or the people of the East from a West point of view. So that is what Edward Said explains in his work Orientalism. And now let's look this work in detail. So we have questions from Orientalism for the past few years for the NET exam. So Orientalism is actually a very important work when it comes to NET point of view, and this is not a very difficult text if you understand what Edward Said means or what Edward Said wants to convey in this particular text. It would be easy to answer the questions because most of the questions are from the general assumptions of this particular text. So anyway, let's look the text in detail. So Orientalism 1978 by Edward Said. So first let's look about Edward Said. So about Edward Said, he is a Palestinian American scholar, an intellectual and a literary critic. He was born in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem at that time was a part of British administrated Palestine. Okay, so Jerusalem, it was a part of Palestine, and Palestine at that time was British administrated. So he was a Palestinian, and later he migrated to America and became a citizen of America. That is why he is a Palestinian American scholar. And he was a professor of English and comparative literature at Columbia University, and he was a pioneer of post-colonial theory and cultural studies. So that is about Edward Said. And if you look at the key works written by Edward Said, you can find Orientalism 1978, Culture and Imperialism 1993, and The Question of Palestine 1979, and Covering Islam 1981. So if you look at this Said's work in general, that is Orientalism, Culture and Imperialism, The Question of Palestine, his work had a profound impact on the fields of post-colonial studies. And also if you look into detail, we can find his works has got influence on literary criticism and cultural theory, and he remains a very seminal figure in this discussions of power, identity, and these representations of this Eastern world from a Western point of view. So his first work is Orientalism, that is regarded to be his most influential work, and the term Orient became popular with this work. And Culture and Imperialism, which expands on the theme of Orientalism in order to understand how this colonization has contributed to cultural hegemony and resistance. Then The Question of Palestine and Covering Islam, where he addressed the Palestinian struggle and Western media representations of this Islam. So let's look at the context and background in which he wrote Orientalism. So Orientalism was first published in 1978, and if you look at the time, we can say that 1978 is actually the time where where many countries, including India and some other Asian countries, had started their decolonization process. So this is the age of decolonization and also an age of geopolitical shifts. So that was first published in the 1978, you can find already the colonization, the problems of colonization all in Rome, and it was written in the aftermath of decolonization movements in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. It also addresses the legacy of European colonialism and imperialism in shaping Western perceptions of the East. Okay, so basically it addresses the legacy of European colonialism and imperialism, because even if the process was of decolonization, it was not really easy for people to move away from their colonial power. It was really hard for them to bring back their identity, the lost culture, the corrupted history. So it was really a period where these Western perceptions of the East was predominant even in this Eastern country, even among the psychology of the East. So that is what he addresses the most in this particular essay or particular work. So Edward Said he draws on the works of Michel Foucault, because we know that Michel Foucault, Antonio Gramsci, Frantz Fanon, these are the writers who wrote about the power, the distributions of the power, about the relation between power and knowledge, about the other and the power. So all these things, and even Antonio Gramsci's concept of hegemony, ideology, power. So that is what influenced Edward Said. He incorporates insights from post-structuralism, Marxism and psychoanalysis in his analysis, because we can find that Marxism is something that gave importance or voice to the proletariat or the colonized, and similarly post-structuralism, it opposes the binary opposition, and East-West is one major binary opposition where West is regarded to be the predominant or West is regarded to be the center. And also psychoanalysis about how the colonization affects the colonized, affects the mentality of both the colonizer and the colonized. Written against the backdrop of ongoing conflicts in Middle East, including the Arab-Israeli conflict and the Iranian Revolution. And he reflects broader debates about power, knowledge and representation in a post-colonial world. So that is what we can find as a context of this particular work. And about this work, Orientalism, the central thesis of Orientalism is the critique of Western representations of the East, which he argues are grounded in colonial power dynamics and cultural hegemony. So, the Orientalism, the central thesis is the critique of Western representations of the East. So, how West represents the East as something that is to be saved, or something that is savage, something that is uncivilized, barbaric, which has to be civilized by the West. So, such types of Western representations of the East, which he argues are grounded in colonial power dynamics and cultural hegemony. And Western knowledge about the East or the Orient is not objective or neutral, but is shaped by colonial interest and prejudices. So, what he finds problem in the Western representations of the East is that the West people are highly prejudiced about the East. They believe that the East are barbaric, they are civilized. So you cannot find an objective or find a neutral representation of East in any of these Western works, because they are blinded by their colonial interest and prejudices. So, Edward said he critiques Western representations of the East as products of colonial power dynamics and cultural hegemony. So, you can find that Edward said he criticizes this Western representation of the East as products of colonial power dynamics and cultural hegemony. So, none of the ideologies of this East is recognized or valued by the West, because they consider them to be inferior. They consider them to be, they consider the East to be someone has to be saved. So, Orientalism, it refers to the body of knowledge and cultural representations constructed by the West about the East, portraying it as exotic, backward and inferior. So, Orientalism, it refers to the body of knowledge and cultural representations constructed by the West about the East, portraying it as exotic, backward and inferior. So, he says that the West, since it is a binary opposition, the West is always regarded to be beautiful, it is always regarded to be forward and superior, while East is often regarded to be exotic, backward and inferior. And this is something that you can find in these Western representations in literature. For example, here you can find how Chinua Achebe criticizes Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, in which he considered the African people to be extremely uncivilized, as barbaric, as someone, because here you can find that the Marlowe, the character in Heart of Darkness, he gets to a foreign land and he is critical of that foreign land and the foreign people, because they are not welcoming him, while he wants to control them. So, that is the mindset of the Western people that you can find through these representations. So, the Orientalist discourse seeks to justify Western dominance and intervention in the East, perpetuating colonial power structures and marginalizing indigenous voices. So, here you can find that the Orientalist discourse serves to justify the Western dominance. So, according to this Orientalist discourse, these Eastern people, they are extremely superstitious, they follow barbaric rituals, their culture is extremely naive, and we bring our education, the Western education, we bring our Christianity to them so that we can save them. So, they should always be indebted to us. So, that is the mentality of this Western people. So, that actually perpetuate this colonial power structure and marginalize these indigenous voices. So, Orientalism, it refers to the construction of knowledge about the East by Western scholars and intellectuals, portraying it as exotic, mysterious and inferior. So, Orientalism, it is a construction of the knowledge about the East by the Western scholars. Okay, it's about the East by the Western scholars and intellectuals, and in these representation, East is often portrayed as mysterious or exotic or inferior. And Orientalist discourse, it serves to justify Western dominance and intervention in the East, perpetuating this colonial power structure, as we have already mentioned. And Said, he argues that Orientalism not only distorts Western understanding of the East, but also shapes the identity and self-perception of Eastern people. So, the problem with Orientalist discourse is that it actually makes the other Western people believe in their fellow beings. At the same time, it also gradually shapes the identity of the Eastern people. people, that these Eastern people will also start to believe, or these Eastern people had already believed that, yeah, we are exotic, we are mysterious, we are neat, and we needed this Western. That is why we have this reverence to this Western people or the English people even now. Okay, so this is the reason, because this Orientalist discourse, it shaped our identity and self-perception, and we believe ourselves to be the inferior one when a Western man arrives. So he speaks about the relationship between Orientalism and power. That is where he draws the ideologies from Foucault and Gramsci. So Orientalism and power, where there is a construction of otherness. So according to him, Orientalism, it constructs the East as other. So the West is the superior, and the people who does not belongs to this so-called category of West are the others. And when I say someone as an other, that means they lack something that I do not have. Okay, sorry, they lack something that I have. So that is what. So the West, it constructs the East as the other, positioning it in opposition to the West and reinforcing this Western superiority. So that is the construction of otherness. And the other thing is the colonial hegemony. So here you can find that the Orientalist discourse, they serves to justify this colonial domination. Okay, it is right for us to colonial, it is right for us to dominate you in all fields because we are superior and you are inferior. So Orientalist discourse, it serves to justify colonial domination and imperial intervention in the East by portraying it as exotic, irrational, and in need of a Western civilization. So they have made it as their agenda that East, they are in need of Western civilization. So it is our duty, it is a duty of a West to civilize the East. So that is the colonial hegemony that they try to bring out. And then we can find the knowledge and control. So Western representations of this East is not, it does not shape just the perceptions of the West, but it also shapes the perceptions, the identity. It also, what can we say, it control, it manipulate the knowledge. Okay, for example, Macaulay has once said the entire European literature or the entire Indian literature cannot be compared to even one strand of, or even a few European texts. So people gradually starts to believe that. So here you can find that it not just shape the perceptions of the East, but it also control and manipulate the knowledge about that particular region, perpetuating this unequal power relations. And then we can find it also has an impact on this policy, because this Orientalist stereotypes and misconceptions about the East have influenced the colonial policies, and it also continued to shape this Western attitude towards the region. Then we have this resistance and subversion. So said analysis reveals how Orientalist discourse has been challenged and it has been resisted by these indigenous voices and post-colonial movements seeking to reclaim their agency or seeking to reclaim or redefine their identity. So that is a difference between Orientalism and power, or the relation between Orientalism and power that Zaid expresses in his work. Then other thing is the Eurocentrism and other. So according to him, the Eurocentric bias, that is, Eurocentrism means it actually refers to the tendency to view the world from a European point of view or a Western point of view, and it often leads to this marginalization or this cornering of these indigenous people or the people of different backgrounds or these minor people. So here this non-Western cultures and perspectives are often marginalized because of this Eurocentric bias. And as I said, this othering is the process by which this dominant groups, it constructs other as something that is different or something that is inferior or something that should be marginalized because they are uncivilized. So that is what this othering. So the problem is that I have my own identity, my own uniqueness, my own individualism, while these others are a group and they do not have an individuality, while they are defined by the features of their group, and that features are something that is attributed to them by this Westerner. Then we have this binary opposition. So Orientalism, it perpetuates a binary opposition between this West and the East. Okay, and between this West and the East, that West is the civilized and the East is the uncivilized or the exotic, which actually reinforce the superiority of the West over the East. Then we have the cultural hegemony. So Eurocentric narratives, they dominate the global, because even when we study English literature, more than Indian English literature or more than Indian literature, we are focusing more on British literature. So this Western literature or European literature, it dominates the global discourse. So it shapes the perceptions of history, culture and identity in way that marginalize the non-Western voices, because the authority, the credibility is given to this Western voices. Then we have this challenge and resistance. So as I said, his Said's critic, it challenges this Eurocentric bias and it invites the readers to recognize the diversity and complexity of this human nature and the homogeneous group. So that is what he explains in this work. So as a conclusion, we can say that Western writings about the Orient, the perceptions of the East presented in Orientalism cannot be taken at face value, because it is not objective or it is not neutral. It is extremely subjective, because they are cultural representations based upon fictional Western images of the Orient. The history of European colonial rule and political domination of Eastern civilization distorts the intellectual objectivity of even the most knowledgeable, well-meaning and culturally sympathetic Western Orientalists. Thus did the term Orientalism became a pejorative word regarding non-Western people and culture. So Orientalism is not considered to be a positive word, it is considered to be a negative word. And there was a question from Orientalism in December 2023 examination: which of the following is true of Edward Said's Orientalism? It was published in 1979, utilizes the concept of discursive formulation as argued by Foucault. He has taken up the detailed analysis of imaginative geography and representation of the Orient. It is one of the foundational texts of post-colonial theory. It puts to use Barth's concept of death of the author. So here we can find 3 correct answers and you have to identify the correct answer. So it was published in 1979, that is an incorrect statement. Utilizes it was published in 1978, utilizes the concept of discursive formulation as argued by Foucault. That's a correct statement. He has taken up the detailed analysis of imaginative geography and representation of the Orient. That's also a correct statement. It is one of the foundation texts of post-colonial theory. That's also right. It puts to use Barth's concept of death of the author. That is not a correct statement. So if you look, B, C and D are the correct answers. So B, C and D comes as option D. So the correct answer is option D. So that's all about Edward Said's Orientalism. So when you study Orientalism for a net point of view, make sure you understand the content of this particular essay or particular work, because most of the questions are regarding the meanings or regarding the general information regarding this text. So that's all about this video. Thank you.